When you hear the word scholar, what do you picture? Do you picture a straight A student, a gifted student? Maybe someone who's college bound and wins a lot of scholarships. You might picture somebody who's naturally intelligent, has a bunch of advanced degrees, or seems like they never struggle in school. Those are all common images. And yes, some scholars may fit one or more of those descriptions. Those descriptions are incomplete. They can make the word scholar sound like a title reserved for a small group of people. You know, the smartest students, the highest achievers, or the people who've already received some type of recognition. But here at Raising Scholars, we use a much broader and more practical definition. The habits of a scholar begin before the awards, before the scholarships, before the degrees, and before the public recognition. So before we can have a serious conversation about raising scholars, we have to answer one foundational question. What is a scholar? And that's exactly what we're going to break down in today's episode. Welcome to Raising Scholars, a podcast dedicated to developing scholars by building discipline, habits, skills, and lifelong growth. I'm Terrell Scriber, and I'm speaking to you first as an educator. I'm also a father, mentor, United States Marine Corps veteran, coach, entrepreneur, and community leader. All of those experiences influence how I see young people, education, preparation, and adulthood overall. But the educator perspective leads this show. Raising Scholars is for parents. Raising Scholars is for middle school, high school, and college students. It's for young adults, and it's also for teachers, counselors, coaches, mentors, and community leaders alike. It's for anyone who's serious about helping young people become prepared, responsible, and capable adults. And it's also for adults who understand that growth and learning don't stop when school ends. This show isn't only going to be about grades. It isn't only going to be about college. And it's definitely not going to be random motivation without a practical plan behind it. We're going to talk about discipline and academic skills. We'll discuss health, leadership, character, money, careers, and opportunities. We'll also talk about decision-making, responsibility, and what it actually takes to prepare young people for life. But before we get into all of those areas, we have to establish the identity underneath them. Here's the official Raising Scholars definition. A scholar is someone who is actively trying to grow by educating themselves and developing the habits, discipline, and skills needed for life. Let me say that again. A scholar is someone who is actively trying to grow by educating themselves and developing the habits, discipline, and skills needed for life. The word I want you to pay special attention to is actively. A scholar isn't simply somebody who says, I want to do better. And being a scholar doesn't mean that you're perfect or that you always feel motivated, but it does mean you are participating. You're learning, practicing, asking questions, and accepting correction. You're developing habits, and most importantly, you're building discipline. A scholar isn't defined by what they already know. A scholar is defined by their active commitment to continued growth. That's the foundation of this episode, and it's the foundation of the entire podcast. The way we define scholar matters because definitions shape expectations. If we define scholar only as a straight A student, then the student who's struggling may not believe that identity even belongs to them. If we define scholar only as someone who goes to college, then we may ignore young people preparing for military service, trade school, certifications, entrepreneurship, public service, or other types of skilled employment. And if we define a scholar only by grades, we may overlook whether that student is also learning responsibility, communication, self-control, leadership, and preparation for adulthood. Let's get this clear. Academic achievement matters. Grades matter. Learning the material matters. Meeting standards matter. But achievement and development aren't always the same thing. A student can make good grades and still struggle with responsibility or discipline. At the same time, a student can struggle in a subject while still developing into a stronger scholar. A low grade doesn't automatically mean somebody is lazy or incapable, and a high grade doesn't automatically mean every necessary habit has been developed. So the question isn't only what results did the student produce? We also have to ask, how did they prepare? How did they respond to feedback? What did they do when the work became difficult? And what kind of person are they becoming through the process? Achievement matters, but development is larger than achievement. Without development, achievement usually doesn't last. I'm going to break down today's episode into 5 main ideas. The first main idea is the idea that a scholar is more than just a good student. Grades can tell us a lot of things, like how well a student performed on an assignment, whether they understand the material, or whether they're meeting an academic standard. Grades can also affect course placement, scholarships, graduation, college admissions, and a bunch of other opportunities. So this isn't an episode where I tell students that grades don't matter. They do, but a single grade doesn't completely measure discipline, curiosity, character, or the resilience of a student. And when you really think about it, a single grade doesn't fully measure teachability or self-management either. As an educator, I've seen students who understand material quickly. They may be naturally capable, have a natural talent for a subject, or already have experience with the material. They may not need as much repetition as another student, but because learning has sometimes come easily to them, they may not have developed strong study habits. They may wait until the last minute, avoid asking questions, or rely on ability instead of preparation. Then they eventually reach a class, test, a sport, job, or life situation where talent alone isn't enough and they don't know how to respond. I've also seen students who didn't understand the material immediately. They had to ask more questions, attend tutorials, review mistakes, and practice more than once. They had to change strategies and learn how to communicate with the teacher or the professor in some matters. And over time, some of those students became stronger and more independent learners. Now, I'm not saying that the naturally capable student isn't a scholar, and I'm not saying that struggling is automatically better than having ability in the first place. That would be another oversimplification. Ability, effort, and instruction all matter together. So do strategy, support, responsibility, and a person's willingness to reflect and then adjust. The point is that potential by itself doesn't guarantee development. Potential shows us what might be possible, but habits help determine what actually becomes possible. Parents, educators, and mentors have to learn how to look at both the result and the process. If a student made an A, celebrate the A, but also ask, how did you prepare? What did you learn? What strategy worked? And what do you need to continue doing? If a student made a C, we don't have to pretend the C is an excellent academic result. We can be honest about the grade while also asking, what did you misunderstand? What support do you need? What can be corrected? And what are you going to do differently next time? That's scholar development. Now, the second main idea is the idea that a scholar is an active learner. The word active isn't included in our definition by accident. An active learner participates in the learning process. That doesn't mean students should be left alone to figure everything out on their own. Young people need teachers. They need structure, examples, feedback, and they need adults who know more than they do. But an active learner learns how to use that instruction and support. We can break active learning into 3 simple parts. What happens before the task, what happens during the task, and what happens after the task. Before the task, a scholar prepares. They ask, what am I trying to learn? What materials do I need? When am I going to work? And who can help me if I get stuck? During the task, a scholar pays attention to whether the strategy is actually working or not. Do I understand this? Am I focused? Am I making the same mistake repeatedly? Do I need clarification? After the task, a scholar reflects and adjusts. What worked? What didn't? What feedback did I receive? And what should I do differently next time, if anything? That right there is active learning. A middle school student can practice active learning by using a planner or packing their school materials the night before. If you're in high school, you can practice active learning by reviewing missed test questions instead of only looking at the grade. When college students, y'all can practice active learning by going to office hours well before you're failing. Even athletes can practice active learning by asking the coach what techniques need to be corrected during practice or during the actual competition. And parents can participate in active learning by researching how to build a stronger family budget. Scholars don't have to learn alone. In fact, one of the most important skills a scholar can develop is learning how to ask for help wisely. Asking for help isn't the opposite of independence. Learning how to seek the right people is part of becoming independent. Some students wait until the problem becomes a crisis. They wait before the night before the assignment is due or the end of the grading period. They may wait until they've already missed weeks of instruction or until frustration has turned into embarrassment. A scholar learns how to ask earlier and communicate effectively. A scholar learns how to say, I don't understand this part. I tried this strategy, but it isn't working. Do you have another way to do this? What should I practice? Or what can I improve? Those aren't weak questions. Those are scholar questions. A scholar doesn't just sit back and wait for growth to happen. A scholar learns how to actually participate in the process. The third main idea is that scholar identity must be practiced. Calling yourself a scholar doesn't automatically make you disciplined. And calling a child a scholar doesn't automatically teach the child how to study, manage time, ask for help, or respond to feedback. The identity has to be practiced. Identity without behavior is only a slogan. If I say I'm committed to my health, there should eventually be evidence. If I say I'm committed to my finances, there should eventually be evidence. And if I say I'm committed to being a better parent, teacher, leader, athlete, or business owner, there should eventually be evidence. The same is true for scholar identity. A scholar prepares. A scholar corrects mistakes and asks questions. They learn how to receive feedback, how to seek support, and how to continue developing. Let's look at an example. Imagine two students receive a C on the same algebra test. The grade matters. Both students have received information showing that they haven't yet mastered all of the material that was assessed. The first student looks at the grade, throws the test into their backpack, and says, I'm just not a math person. They don't review the questions. They don't look at the materials. They don't look for patterns in their mistakes. They don't even speak to the teacher. And guess what? They don't change their study habits before the next test either. Now, the second student also receives a C. The student may be disappointed or even frustrated, but they reviewed the missed questions. After analyzing their work, they realized they understood the first step, but kept making a mistake during the second step. They meet with the teacher, ask questions, and get more practice during tutorials. And guess what? They also change how they prepare for the next test. Now, I can't promise that the second student is automatically going to make an A. Growth doesn't always happen that quickly or in a perfectly straight line. But I can tell you this, the second student has created a much better opportunity to improve because they changed the process. Maybe the next grade is a B. Maybe it's a B+. Maybe improvement takes more than one test. But there's a much greater chance for growth because the student reviewed, adjusted, sought help, and prepared differently. That's why scholar identity needs evidence. Keep the question simple. What did I do today that shows I'm becoming a scholar? Did I read something, practice a skill, correct a mistake, ask for help, or prepare for something that matters? For raising scholars, we can also remember the identity through a simple formula. Scholar equals growth plus education plus discipline plus habits plus skills plus life preparation. That formula doesn't replace the official definition. It simply helps us remember what the definition requires. You don't prove scholar identity by saying the word. You prove it by producing evidence. The fourth main idea is that a scholar is preparing for life. Education isn't only preparation for the next assignment or the next test or graduation for that matter. A scholar is preparing for life. That includes learning how to make decisions, work with other people, manage money, communicate, lead, handle responsibility, and continue learning when there's no teacher standing in front of the room. The skills we develop in school should connect to the skills we need in life. Meeting deadlines supports workplace responsibility. Reading comprehension helps people understand contracts, instructions, policies, and other important information. Writing helps people communicate clearly. Mathematics supports money management, measurement, planning, and problem solving. Research skills help people compare careers, schools, programs, loans, investments, and other major decisions. Teamwork supports relationships, employment, leadership, athletics, and community service. Revision teaches us that the first attempt doesn't always have to be the final attempt. And self-control affects health, money, relationships, work, and decision-making. The real value of education isn't only what you know when you leave school. It's what you're prepared to do with what you know. Scholar identity also continues through adulthood. A parent learning how to communicate more effectively with a child is practicing scholar behavior. A veteran earning a certification, returning to school, building a business, or learning a new career field is practicing scholar behavior. An entrepreneur learning accounting, marketing, or customer service is practicing scholar behavior. Even an older adult learning how to use new technology is practicing scholar behavior. Graduation shouldn't mark the end of learning. It should mark the beginning of a greater responsibility for your own learning. The pathway can be different, but the habits and preparation still matter. Now, the fifth and final main idea is one I absolutely cannot skip, and that's the idea that everyone can enter the process. Scholar identity isn't reserved for gifted students, wealthy students, students in advanced classes, or students who already seem to have everything figured out. Everyone can enter the process of intentional growth, but we also have to tell the truth. People don't always enter the process from equal starting points. Some students have stable homes, quiet places to study, reliable transportation, technology, tutoring, and adults who understand how the education system works. Other students don't. Some learners may need more time, accommodations, assistive technology, counseling, tutoring, or language support. Others may need reliable meals, transportation, mentorship, or simply a safe place to work. We should never pretend those realities disappear because we told somebody to have a positive attitude. Belief can help, encouragement can help, but they don't replace instruction, resources, opportunity, safety, or support. Research on growth mindset gives us an important reminder. Believing that ability can develop may help somebody stay engaged, but mindset isn't a miracle cure. It doesn't mean that anyone can achieve any outcome just by trying harder. It doesn't mean every student needs the same strategy. And it doesn't allow adults to avoid their responsibility to teach, support, and create opportunities. The responsible message is this: every person can begin an intentional process of growth from their current position. The process may look different, the support may look different, and the timeline may look different. But the person can begin learning, practicing, and preparing. That's why high expectations and support have to remain together. High expectations without instruction can become frustration, and support without responsibility can create dependence. We do not lower the standard, we develop the scholar so they can reach the standard. We also have to separate achievement from human worth. A child doesn't become more valuable because they made an A. A child doesn't become worthless because they made a poor decision. A mistake may need correction. A consequence may be appropriate, and a standard may still need to be enforced. But there's a difference between saying that decision needs to be corrected and saying you are a failure. There's a difference between saying you didn't prepare responsibly and saying you're just lazy. Our language should create accountability without trapping a young person inside one mistake, one grade, or one difficult season. So whether you're a high-achieving student, a student struggling, a parent learning something new, a veteran changing careers, or a young person who doesn't yet know which pathway to choose, you can enter the process. Struggle doesn't disqualify you from being a scholar. What matters is learning how to respond to the struggle with honesty, strategy, support, and continued development. As an educator, I've learned that young people usually need more than somebody telling them, do better. Do better how? What habits need to change? What skills need to be taught? What routine is missing? What support is needed? What consequence is appropriate? What responsibility belongs to the student? And what responsibility belongs to the adult? Scholars don't simply appear. Young people need modeling, instruction, structure, accountability, feedback, opportunity, and support. And over time, they need to accept increasing responsibility for their own development. As parents and educators, we sometimes make the mistake of wanting the outcome without building the systems first. We want the high grades. We want the scholarships. We want them accepted into colleges and selected for leadership positions. We want the child to become responsible, but responsibility is developed through repeated opportunities to practice responsibility. Discipline is developed through repeated opportunities to practice discipline. Decision-making is developed by allowing young people to make age-appropriate decisions and experience manageable consequences. And confidence is usually developed through preparation, practice, correction, and improvement. Scholars don't simply appear. Scholars are raised, taught, challenged, supported, corrected, and gradually taught to take ownership of their own development. And every person listening right now has a role to play. For parents, here's one question I want you to start asking your child. What did you do today that gives evidence you're becoming a scholar? That question moves the conversation beyond only asking, what grade did you make? Or Did you finish your homework? Now, don't get me wrong, those questions still matter, but also ask, what did you learn? What was difficult? What strategy did you use? What did you correct? Did you ask for help? And what are you preparing for next? Parents, let your children see you learning too. Let them see you read, research, ask questions, improve your finances, work on your health, or admit when you don't know something. You can't tell people that learning is lifelong without behaving as though adults have nothing left to learn. And when you praise your child, be specific. Don't only say you're smart, give recognition to the process. You might say something like, you prepared responsibly, or that was smart, but the smartest thing you did was change your strategy. Point out when they asked for help well before the deadline, reviewed their mistakes, or kept a commitment. That kind of language helps children understand which behaviors they should actually repeat. For all the scholars listening out there, here's your daily standard. Learn something, practice something, improve or correct something, ask for help when you need it, and prepare for something that matters. You don't have to do every one of those things every single day. The point is to stop waiting for growth to happen by accident. Choose one area where you've been waiting for somebody else to make you improve. Maybe you need to create a study schedule, review your mistakes, research a career, practice a weak skill, or put the phone away. Choose the next action that belongs to you. You don't have to know everything to be a scholar, but you do have to be willing to learn and keep developing. For educators and mentors, use the word scholar as both an invitation and as an expectation, but don't use it as an empty nickname. If we call young people scholars, we have to teach them what that means. Teach them how to plan, take useful notes, study, communicate, ask questions, seek help, review feedback, and revise their work. Set clear standards, give useful feedback, provide appropriate support, and gradually return responsibility to the learner as they develop. Avoid permanent labels like the smart student, the bad student, the lazy student, or the student who'll never understand. Hold young people accountable, but don't trap them inside one grade, one mistake, or one reason for a poor decision. Don't merely call young people scholars. Teach them what a scholar is and does, and hold them accountable for practicing those habits. Before we close, I want to give everybody one simple challenge. For the next 7 days, record one action each day that gives evidence of scholar growth. It could be something you learned, practiced, corrected, questioned, or prepared for. Write it in a notebook, your phone, or on a calendar. The daily question is, what did I do today that shows I'm becoming a scholar? At the end of the 7 days, look back at your evidence and then ask yourself, what am I doing consistently? Which scholar habit is missing? And what needs to become a part of my regular routine? Parents, consider doing the challenge with the children so they can see adults are still scholars too. All right, so let's review the 5 main ideas. First, a scholar is more than just a good student. Grades matter, but they don't completely define scholar development. Second, a scholar is an active learner. Scholars prepare, ask questions, seek feedback, get help, reflect, and adjust. Third, scholar identity must be practiced. Identity without behavior is only a slogan. Fourth, a scholar is preparing for life. Learning should prepare us for responsibility, work, relationships, money, leadership, decision-making, and continued growth. And fifth, everyone can enter the process. Starting points, barriers, supports, and timelines may be different, but each person can begin an intentional process of growth from where they are. Now let's return one more time to the official definition. A scholar is someone who is actively trying to grow by educating themselves and developing the habits, discipline, and skills needed for life. That definition is inclusive, but it isn't empty. It keeps expectations high without demanding perfection, and it makes room for both personal responsibility and the support people genuinely need. On our next episode, we're going to discuss the 6 pillars of raising scholars. We'll introduce the 6 areas that guide the entire platform. The first pillar is discipline, habits, and mindset. The second is academic success and learning skills. The third is health, wellness, and performance. The fourth is leadership, character, and purpose. The fifth is financial literacy and life readiness. And the sixth pillar is pathways and opportunities. Until then, share this episode with a parent, scholar, educator, coach, counselor, mentor, or anyone else you believe could benefit from it. And begin using this definition in your home, your classroom, team, mentoring program, or any other organization you're a part of. All right, I'll see y'all on the next episode. Until then, keep raising them.